Hello and welcome to Debating Europe's Facebook Live event here in the European Parliament in Brussels. My name is Joe Litobarski. I'm the editor of Debating Europe. And today we have a panel discussion on sustainable agriculture with or without pesticides. And you can follow on Twitter if you want using the hashtag with or without. And joining me today we have a panel of experts on all things agriculture. I'll start on my right. We have Martin Dermine, who is representing the Pesticides Action Network. Next to him is Faustine Bas-Defossez, who's from the European Environmental Bureau. And then on my left, we've got Graeme Taylor from the European Crop Protection Association, and next to him is Paolo de Castro, who's a member of the European Parliament and the S&D spokesperson on agriculture. Yep. We're going to, as is the sort of Debating Europe format, we're going to respond to some questions which were sent in by you on our Facebook page and on our website, debatingeurope.eu. And we'll open the debate with a question from Soren, which is a general question. He sent this in saying, sustainable agriculture is only possible using pesticides as long as they are used responsibly and professionally. Do you agree? And let's start the debate with Martin. Martin, so what would you say to Soren?
Sustainable for us means does not harm the environment or human health, and pesticides use harms the environment and human health. So sustainable agriculture, in our view, is agroecology, organic agriculture, but no pesticides because they harm the environment.
Okay, nice and quick. Let's go to Graeme. Graeme, what would you say to Soren?
A very simple and direct answer is that I absolutely think that pesticides are absolutely necessary for sustainable agriculture. I think Martin said very clearly he doesn't think that pesticides are, but I would question at the moment what the alternative model is. And I'm not here to say that pesticides are a panacea, certainly not. But I think the reality that we face today in Europe is that we face a growing world population of 10 billion people. By 2050, we have to be able to feed those people in a safe and a sustainable way. And using pesticides are one of the many tools that farmers have access to and need to have access to be able to do that efficiently.
Okay, so there's disagreement, which is good. Faustine, what would you say?
Yes, I very much agree with what Martin has said, and I would be interested in challenging what Graeme has said about we need to feed the war narrative, but I wanted to respond to the question first,
yes,
actually.
Please.
And,
okay.
and for us, actually, we should ask ourselves whether we have sustainable agriculture in Europe today, and then what is EU policy doing about that? If you think that farming needs healthy soil, needs biodiversity, needs clean water, and if you look at the state of those natural resources, then the answer is simple. Unfortunately, we don't have sustainable agriculture in Europe today. And then what is the policy doing about that? Well, there is the so-called Sustainable Use of Pesticides Directive, which is the EU pesticides law, and EU countries should implement it. But actually, yesterday there was a report from the Commission that's very timely, which clearly stated that EU countries are not in line with the legislation and are not implementing it correctly. Normally, they should promote alternatives to pesticides uses and reduce the risks of uses of pesticides. And finally, we also have a big problem with our farming policy, which is a big bunch of public subsidies, 58 billions of euros spent annually on farms, to farmers. And actually, there is no link between this policy and the EU pesticides law. So that means that farmers who are actually receiving the subsidies do not necessarily have to comply with the sustainable use of pesticides. So we clearly have a problem there.
Okay, well, I'm going to go on to regulation, and we'll go on to that. But first of all, the question from Soren. Paolo de Castro, what would you say?
Well, I say that I agree with Martin. The question if it's possible, because if you look at the history, when I started the European Union, we, until 25, 30 years ago to now, we reduce a lot of chemistry, more or less 50% of the active principle, and this is an incredible good result. Maybe we should go more. Yes, we should do more. There are an incredible, interesting new technology to combat disease, plant disease, for example, with genetics instead of use of chemistry. And I wonder now, talking about new breeding techniques, which are very interesting because we can eliminate tons and tons of chemistry instead of using, So the future is interesting if you look at the innovation with the scientific-based approach. We should take not in an emotional way. here we are in the parliament and we take decision every day. And we need to take a decision, stay on the science and not just on the emotion. But of course, as a consumer, I would like to use organic product. I don't want chemistry, but I know that there are plant disease today that we need to use this kind of products. Otherwise, we don't have any other option to produce the food that we need to produce because the world is increasing demand. We know that. But how the technology and the innovation can help us to reduce? Because we live much more than before. Today, our life is much longer, and this is because we are improving very much the use of chemistry, and I hope we know much more in the future, and I dream 100% of organic food in the future, but we need to go, step by step. Otherwise, we cannot, take in reality.
Yeah, no, we have had a question on technology that's interesting. We'll come to that. First of all, I want to pick up on what Faustine said because we had a question on the rules, on the regulations which govern pesticides. I think everyone at the table would probably agree that pesticides in themselves can be dangerous, but just because something's dangerous doesn't mean that we ban it. You can regulate things that are dangerous and still use them. So the question is from Elena. She asks, is pesticide use appropriately regulated in Europe today? Are the rules the right rules? Let's start with Graeme. What would you say?
I think there's always room to improve the regulation, and there's always this idea somehow that our industry don't want regulation. That's far from the case. For us as an industry, putting products on the market, it's very important that that's done in a clear, consistent, agreed framework. And most importantly, that it's based on science. And going back to the point that was made by Mr. De Castro about emotion, this morning in the Parliament there was the debate around glyphosate, a debate that's incredibly emotional. And if we want to go back to talking about the importance of science, glyphosate is arguably the safest molecule ever to have been put on the market. But there's been a sort of an emotional argument that's developed, which has really clouded the science. And again, glyphosate, if you talk about sustainable agriculture and how we contribute to the environment, how we reduce CO2 emissions, we reduce tillage, glyphosate's a tool that can contribute to that. So there are a lot of different elements. It's not a simple black and white argument, but I think we can always do better.
Okay, Faustine, so you think that the rules are okay, it's just enforcement that is the issue?
Yeah, I mean, we can always improve the EU regulation, but we have a big problem with enforcement right now at the country's level, and we need to enforce that, and we need to make a better link with the farm subsidies policy as well. But I just wanted to go back to the point on evidence-based, because yes, we need to have policy that is evidence-based, and we need to be rational. Actually, what science tells us now is that hunger is actually not caused by scarcity, but by poverty and inequality. We have enough food now, we produce enough to feed the people that we expect, in 2050, the 10 billion people. And the problem is how we actually distribute the food. Even if we produce more, it's not going to necessarily reach the ones who actually need it. So the question is, we need to tackle food waste. We need to tackle, the way we distribute food. And this is also why we are asking for the future farm policy in Europe to look more at consumption, because production and consumption are two sides of the same coin, and you cannot look at one and ignore the other. Really, the parliamentarians, and here I'm looking at Mr. De Castro, needs to listen to the people who have responded to a consultation on the future of the farm policy. Over 250,000 of people have asked for radical changes, for a new farm policy that is fair, that is globally responsible, and that is sustainable as well, and that looks at consumption. So that's very important.
Okay, I want to hear from Martin. Let's move on to the, Graeme raised the issue of glyphosate. We had a question on health from Anthony, who asks how many of today's human illnesses have a link to pesticide-contaminated foods. That would include things like cancer and so on, I presume. What would you say to Anthony, maybe linking it to what Graeme said?
So I would say that currently the evidence we have on pesticide and the toxicity, MEP de Castro was saying we grow longer and longer. But what we observe is that the farmers, the farmer community, the people living around the fields that are exposed to pesticides, they have higher rates of a certain amount of diseases, like blood cancer, like neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson. So it is not true that the use we do of pesticide is safe. And we have to take this into account that there is no safe use of pesticide. So in our view, it is not possible to, we cannot say today that the regulation on pesticide protects people. There is enough evidence showing that pesticide use is toxic to humans. Then the consumption of food containing residues, there is what we know is that there are many examples around the world of people consuming food that either get intoxicated acutely or chronically, or even die. There was an example in Argentina 2 weeks ago of a young girl eating an orange and who died from the pesticide residues that were in it. And there is also what we don't know. Food contains a lot of pesticide residues, including the one that disrupt our hormones, the endocrine disrupting pesticides. And there is a lot that we don't know currently. And we consider that the European Union should not say, oh, it's fantastic because half of the food we eat does not contain pesticide residues. We should say it's still a problem that half of the food we eat still contains pesticide residues because there's a lot that we don't know currently.
Okay, so Paolo de Castro.
It's very important what Martin said. We need to trust our agency. Otherwise, it's better close. European Food Safety Authority and European Chemistry, ECPA, they make a scientific study, they compare the study, and they give us information. I think we need to trust them. And it was the debate of today in the joint committee, Agri and Envy, when talking about glyphosate. So it's important to take on board the scientific approach because I'm not a scientist. I have to take a decision. And of course, I want to take care about my farmers. Well, if I look at the farmers community, they don't live less than my father. At the time of after the Second World War, the life was about 50, 55. Today they stay 80, 85. So something better is done. Please underline the good things we have done in Europe under the European regulation. We did a lot of step ahead. You say, we need to do more. I totally agree with you. We need to do more. And this is the reason because we are every day spend a lot of money on research, give time to have a new output of this research, and maybe we understand that, chemistry specific active principle we have to eliminate. Remember, one of the most important was DDT. We still have a country in the world that is using DDT. We are eliminating in the year 70. So the way is how we can keep on board the science in the best way and give the correct information to our consumer and our farmers to produce in the better way. We are doing a lot of steps in the good direction, but we need to do more. And I think the innovation in the future can give us a lot of new instruments to do that.
Can I maybe just underline that point? I mean, I think we as an industry would agree that we need to do more as well. But I think that, frankly, we operate in an environment at the moment where it's very difficult for our industry to come forward with these innovations because, quite frankly, the political environment is so negative towards pesticides. We're not saying pesticides are a panacea, but if you look at the level of safety that is built into the EU food system, if you look at the safety limits for pesticides, residues, they're way above any level that would be considered to be worrying for the consumer. And the fact that pesticide residues are there is not in itself, a reason for people to be concerned. There are lots of different fruits, vegetables. Pears is a good example. Formaldehyde occurs naturally in pears, but it occurs at a level that is so low that it's not of concern for people. You'd have to eat tens of thousands of pears every day. So the fact that residues, I think, need to be clear, the fact that residues exist should not in itself be a concern.
Okay, I'm going to let someone come back on that, and then I want to move on to another question from a user. Does either of you want to, Martin? Yes.
Yeah, the problem with
I'll
residues in food is that currently our agency, EFSA, is assessing the toxicity of the residues one by one. But consumers are exposed to sometimes dozens of residues per day. And we know by the scientific publications from independent science that there are cocktail synergistic effects between these different residues. And this is not assessed for the moment. So saying we don't have to worry, I wouldn't say we don't have to worry. We should know more and take extra safety measures to protect consumers.
Okay, Faustine, I'll let you answer. I just quickly want to move on to a question from a reader. So one of the kind of most common responses that we've had on Debating Europe has been, on the one hand, the sort of public health that we're talking about, and you can kind of mention public health in your answer, but the other side is the sort of economic argument. And I have a question from Lucas who asks, would food be more expensive without pesticides, and would consumers be willing to pay? So what would how would you kind of respond to that?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that I agree very much with what Martin has said, and seeing the risks that have been highlighted by renowned also bodies such as the WHO, which says that pesticides can be toxic to humans, it is extremely important that EU policies reduce the risks of exposure to pesticides. And on that, as I was saying, clearly the Common Agricultural Policy, which is the farm policy, is not doing enough, far from it. It should really help farmers to transit towards more sustainable practices and promote alternatives to pesticides use, such as crop rotation, ecological infrastructures, etc. And we are very much far from it. Now about food being expensive if you reduce pesticides use. We should really stop thinking that cheap food is cheap, because cheap food is not cheap, because there are a lot of environmental externalities. The FAO itself said that there is a strong disconnection between the true cost of production and the price that we find in the supermarkets. Who has to bear the cost of pollution, of health? Taxpayers. So we should really look at that, clearly. Policy should be there to tackle that. We should tax maybe, at national level, these externalities and over pesticides uses as well. And we should eventually, as I said, and I really want to repeat, have a farm policy, because it's taxpayers' money. It's subsidies at the end of the day, telling the farmers how to farm. We should really use the subsidies for farmers to transit to more sustainable practices, as consumers and taxpayers and citizens are asking for, and
Faustine
farmers themselves.
Right. Faustine is right. It's exactly what we have done in the last reform of Common Agricultural Policy. For the first time, we introduced greening. And now 30% of the whole budget for CAP is involving to force farmers to do greening products. Again, it's not enough.
No.
We should do more. Okay. We have another reform on board, so in the NANSI 2020 we have to do another reform. And I hope that we are going in the same direction, to force farmers do more about environmental. And then maybe we can improve the practice, we can improve the agro-environmental practice. Yes, maybe with an incentive approach instead of penalty, because what I understand in this reform that we have done in the last legislature, and a lot of farmers in Europe are very much against Europe. And that would be very surprised me, because we spend a lot of money for this policy. In United Kingdom, 80% of the farmers vote in favor of Brexit. And if you make a survey around Europe, large majority of farmers are against Europe. So we make some mistake. And one mistake was to use penalty instead of incentive. Even for the environment, in my mind, I think it's much more useful to incentive the approach of farmers to use good practices for the environment. And this can make very good step ahead.
And what about Faustine's point? There's a sort of hidden cost to food, and that food should maybe be more expensive, so to incorporate that cost. That's a tough sell for a politician.
This is always said so. This is always, the farmer said, our food is too cheap, because they don't get enough money for their income. In fact, the price go in another part of the chain.
Yes.
This is another important task, because we need to take a look on the chain, because why the consumer pay much more than what the farmers get. This is another problem inside the chain. We are working of the trade, the distortion inside of chain. And this is another problem. Our farmers should be more organized to get more power. Otherwise, or the power go to the retail or other people. So there are many aspects on that, but we should remember all the time the incredible step ahead we have done. If you look at the past, look at what we have done in year 20, 30, 40. If you look today about chemistry, about the environment, we have now ecological focus area, we have a greening practice, we have agro-environmental emission, we have a rural development approach. We spend a lot of attention on that. So, need to do more, and we hope the next reform going in this direction. But don't say, please, that we are not doing anything, because it's not true.
Okay, Lucas thinks that food might get more expensive. What would you say to him?
I mean, just quickly underline the point Mr. De Castro made again. We are living longer, healthier lives than ever before in any part of the world in Europe, and I think we should absolutely bear that in mind. And a lot of the debate around pesticides, you would think that was quite simply not the case. So I think we have to acknowledge that a lot of progress has been made. Coming back to the question about cost. To be honest, I don't really think it's for us to sit here and decide, how much people are willing to pay for their food or not. I think what is beholden on us is to have an open, honest, and genuine debate about the challenges we face when it comes to food production, and have a genuine, open, honest debate with society about what these different models will mean. Could we farm without pesticides? Possibly we could, but what would that mean? Would that mean that we go back to a time like the 20s or 30s where people have to pay 60% of their income for food? Potentially, but we don't know. And I think like I said, we owe it to society to have that debate.
Faustine, you wanted to...
I just wanted to go back on the policy and the greening. Well, I'm happy to hear that the Parliament wants to do more, because I'm sorry to say that last time there was indeed a greening attempt, but the Parliament and the countries made it completely irrelevant. So now it's not true to say that the policy is greener. You talked about ecological focus areas, which are part of the land that farmers were meant to live for biodiversity, bees, etc. The Commission proposed that we ban pesticides uses on that, which makes a lot of sense if you actually want to protect pollinators on these areas, because pesticides are very harmful for them. But the parliamentarians from your Commission actually try to oppose to the ban of pesticides on ecological focus areas, which is completely insane. Then my second point is that with the so-called greening measure, we see in France places like farmers actually get the green payment, the so-called green payments for maize monoculture under the head of crop diversification. This is nonsense. We should stop fooling people. It's about taxpayers' money. It's about 59 billions of euros going to farmers. We really need to make sure that it helps the farmers to become more sustainable, and that it also responds to the society's demands.
Let me clarify this point, because it's very important. Yes, we have 5% of our land in ecological focus area. We totally agree to say no pesticide at all. But when we talk about nitrogen fixed crop, this is what asking the Parliament. This is what asking Agriculture Committee. When we talk about nitrogen fixed crop, we believe that the nitrogen fixed crop, like soybean, like other crop, leguminous, are much better to leave the land without any set aside. This is the point. And there are a lot of studies by the environmentalists who say that the nitrogen fixed crop is better than don't do nothing. And this is the reason we ask, okay, eliminate pesticide in ecological focus area, but make an exception to the farmers who use nitrogen fixed crop. Yeah, this was the point, and this was why we should.
Just hold on to that, because we're almost finished. We're almost out of time. So I'm going to put one last question. If you have any final thoughts, you can sort of pack it into there. So the last question then, so let's pick a question from Nando, who says we would not need pesticides if we consumed food more efficiently with less wastage during storage, transportation, wastage by consumers, etc. Is this a way that we can, realistically move to a kind of lower pesticide use? Martin, what would you say?
Yes, clearly. I think we need to rethink and completely change our agricultural model, relocalize agriculture close to consumers. And this is a good way also to reduce food waste, mostly in fruits and vegetables. Coming back to the previous question about price, clearly there are already many studies proving that externalities outweigh the benefits of pesticides, and that if using agroecology, not using pesticides, relocalizing agriculture will lead to cheaper food production and that is sustainable and does not use pesticide. And this is not a debate we should have here, yes or no. The figures exist in the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization. It is possible. It already exists in many regions, in many countries, and making people think you will pay more or we will go all hungry tomorrow is completely false. But this is the scaremongering messages from the industry that we hear all the time. But many examples in UN reports show that this is completely untrue.
Okay, Graeme, when we talk about food waste, some of that is waste to pests, isn't it? I mean, what would you say to Nando?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the FAO report that suggested that even with the use of pesticides, you lose up to 40% of crops. They then went on to say that if you don't have pesticides, you're losing up to 80% of crops. So these are serious figures, and it's the FAO. I mean, you can laugh, but it's the FAO. And to come back to your point about us having enough food, we live in a world where there's not one single case linking illness in humans to things like GM, for example. But we also live in a world where 4 million children are going hungry every year. So this idea that we have enough food, it's not just about what we're producing in Europe. It's about a global picture, and we need to contribute to that, and we need to do it in a sustainable way. I agree there's lots of ways. I agree there are a lot of different ways that we can produce food. It doesn't need to necessarily be done just using pesticides, for sure. But like I said, we need to have an open and an honest debate about society, about what model of agricultural production we want for the future, because we have significant challenges that we have to face.
Okay, Paolo de Castro, final thoughts. Food wastage, what would you say?
Well, I like to remember that the first report in the European Parliament in food waste was the last legislature under our committee. And one point we should clarify to everybody. All people in the world waste food. Not only the rich countries, even the poor country in the world, we have a lot of food waste in Africa. It's different kind of waste, of course. We waste in the last part of the chain, and this kind of people waste at the beginning of the chain. So there is room for everybody, even in our own house, to make in our home, to make a step on this direction. I think we are now in Europe ready to start with the new legislation on food waste. That's very important. And the Commissioner Andriukaitis said that they are preparing something in the future. I hope as soon as is possible, because the Parliament is ready. We approve with a large majority on this, and this is one of the main points. Because it's true, we have a lot of food. But in the future, if we look at the demand, the world demand, well, the world supply is getting less than the world demand. So someday, I think we need to reflect about how to produce more with less resources in a more sustainable way. This is the challenges, and everybody have to work for that.
Okay, Faustine, final word.
Yeah, I mean, the food waste problem is obviously quite shocking when you think how much we're actually throwing to the bin, and that people are actually starving every day. As Martin was saying, we really need to have a more holistic approach and a systemic approach. We need to tackle the whole supply chain, and we need to push for more short supply chains. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, and it's not so much important for farmers to sell cheap food worldwide. What matters for them is to have a fair income and to have fair prices. None of the two are met today. None of the two. Farmers are over-dependent on farm subsidies. More than 30% of farm incomes today in Europe comes from public money. This is everything but sustainable. This has to change. We need to make farmers more sustainable, and sustainability is the solution, environmentally first, then economically and socially. So that's extremely important, and I hope that the politicians have heard the message, because again, 250,000 people have asked for radical changes in the policy. And I just wanted to close on the ecological focus areas. If the parliamentarians have not pushed for having crops in areas which were meant to be buffer strips, hedges, etc., for pollinators and for wildlife, for biodiversity, we would not have ended into that situation. That is because the parliamentarians have watered down the initial proposal from the Commission that it has happened, and we very much hope that in the future it won't happen again.
We will try to do best in the future.
20 seconds. Okay, fine.
No, I mean, of course, this is a question of what you trust. I mean, we did a step ahead. This is for sure, because greening was an important step in this policy. The environmental people say we need to do more. Okay, we are trying to do. In the next year, I think the next reform will be another step ahead. But please, don't say that we don't do nothing, because it's not true. We're doing a lot, and our farmers doing a lot. we do more. We need to do more, and we will do.
Okay, okay. I can tell that you'd like to continue the debate. If you online want to continue the debate, then you can go to our website, debatingeurope.eu, and you can leave your comments and your questions there, or you can use the Twitter hashtag with or without. Thank you very much to the panelists for taking part.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching.